Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a fairly overcast Oxford today. Although, actually, just looking at it now, it looks like the worst of the rain is hopefully cleared. But great to see so many people from all across the world joining us today, as it always is on these sessions. So wherever you are, and however early or late it is, I hope you're well and looking forward to today's session. So we're very lucky to have today Professor Richard Whittington, who's a professor in strategic management here at the business school, who's kindly offered his time to give you guys a taster into what it would be like to be taught on the executive MBA program here at the school, and we'll be handing over to him very shortly for that session, which hopefully will be a pretty interactive session. So feel free to get involved and put questions in the chat and that kind of thing. Also, a number of my colleagues will be on the call if anyone has any questions around the recruitment and admissions process. So feel free to add those as well. But before we hand over to Richard, I just wanted to give everyone a brief overview of the Executive MBA program here at Oxford Said. I know from looking at a few of the names of people who are joining the call that there's already been some interaction with us in the recruitment team, but obviously everyone will be at a slightly different stage. So just a kind of a broad overview to start with today. Okay, so yeah, so the first thing to note about our program is that we as a business school are embedded within an 800-year-old academic institution here at Oxford. And I think for everyone, when you're considering an executive MBA or looking at different business schools, important to note that in comparison to some other options that are out there, which are standalone business schools. So if you are the sort of person that is intellectually curious and interested in getting involved in the wider ecosystem of a university, then that's definitely something that could be of interest to you. So just something to bear in mind there. This is a brief overview of the Executive MBA program itself in terms of the structure. So what you would be looking at is between 16 and 18 week-long modules over 22 to 24 months. That term modules refers to the week that you would actually be physically present here in Oxford. So roughly 1 week out of every 5 over the course of the program, you would be traveling to Oxford for an in-person in-residence week here in Oxford, or at one of the international locations for those particular modules. So we have one core international module, which is business and emerging markets, delivered currently either in Vietnam, India, or Peru. And then you could do 2 electives in the second half of the program, one of which is delivered in Palo Alto in Silicon Valley, looking at entrepreneurial finance, and inclusive business, which is delivered in Cape Town in South Africa. So you could actually end up doing 3 of your module weeks in overseas locations. We have the 2 intakes each year of between 60 and 70 students roughly each time. So you could start the program in either January or September, depending on what works best for you in terms of your working circumstances and so on. The vast majority of people are still working full-time during the program. So having that flexibility in terms of start date, people have found is quite helpful just in terms of making that decision. This is what a typical class looks like. So the class that started literally a few weeks ago in September this year, as you can see, we've got 43% women on the program for that particular class. That's a number that we're constantly trying to improve on. And there's a very strong overall strategy in place across the school to hopefully achieve that aim. 24 different nationalities represented in the class. It is a truly global cohort with people traveling in from all over. A number of participants are based in the UK, but actually very much in the minority. The majority of our participants are based internationally and travel to Oxford for each module week. On average, people have around 15 years of work experience, with usually around 5 of those in a management role. And the average age, as you can see there, is 39. We also have a number of different employment sectors represented in the class as well, 28 there, which I'll come on to in a second, just in a little more detail. So this is how the international diversity of the class is represented. As you can see, people traveling in from all over with particularly strong representations from the likes of North America and Africa. And yeah, although the program, as you'd expect, is very much Oxford centric in terms of the teaching, your peer group within the class is certainly going to be extremely global and an opportunity to work alongside people from a range of different geographies to bring those perspectives to the room. So the different industries that we have represented on the program, this is obviously in relation to a particular class, i.e. the most recent one, so there will be some tweaks to this, but I think that gives a good representation of the type of industries that you could expect to see on the program. And I think here at Oxford, we have a particularly good track record of attracting people from industry sectors who you wouldn't ordinarily expect to find in an executive MBA classroom. So I think that brings an extra richness to the discussion and lots of interesting perspectives. A little sort of snapshot into life as an executive MBA student here at Oxford. So those illustrations you can see there. First of all, an Oxford college as a participant on the program. You're also a member of one of the university colleges, which is a really useful conduit into the wider university if you have an interest in a particular academic discipline outside the business school, a particular research area, or you just want to get involved in the Oxford ecosystem more broadly. The Oxford Union, you can see there top right, as a participant on the EMBA program, you'll get an opportunity to debate at the Oxford Union, and you'll have a membership there, which a lot of our students take full advantage of. And also, once you graduate from the program, you'll be a member of the Oxford Business Alumni Network, which is an incredibly powerful tool for those looking to go on and build businesses and leverage those relationships once they've completed the program. Incidentally, you'll also be a member of the wider Oxford University Alumni Network as well. So there are different layers to that network that you can expect. So if you want to find out a little bit more, and you're inspired by Richard's lecture today into finding out more about the Executive MBA program and how you could get involved, contact one of us in the recruitment team. As I said, my name's Jonathan Dover. I look after recruitment in North America and Africa, and you can see my colleagues Alejandra, Joe and Siobhan look after different regions. So depending on where you're based, and I can see on the call today we've got people dialing in from all over, please go ahead and contact one of us in the recruitment team, and myself and my colleagues will be happy to walk you through the program in more detail than I've given there, but also just to give you a steer on whether the program could be a good fit for you at this stage in your career and that kind of thing. So please do reach out to us. In terms of application deadlines, so we're currently accepting applications for the September 24 class next year. As you can see, there are a number of different application deadlines that you should be aware of if that intake is of interest to you. We do accept applications on a rolling basis. But we do also review applications on a rolling basis and applications for our scholarships as well. So it's definitely worth thinking about getting your application in as early in the cycle as possible to give yourself the best possible chance of accessing some of that scholarship funding if that's a route that you'd like to go down. So yeah, just some dates to have sort of front of mind if September 24 is a potential option for you. But without further ado, I want to hand over to Richard. And this is obviously the main focus of today. But hopefully that's given you a bit of an overview of the program and a sense for where this kind of class and this kind of content could sit within the wider program. So yeah, I'm going to stop sharing my slides now and hand over to Richard. So I'll leave it to you.
So my question's this. Who is a strategist around here? Now, what we'll be doing during the EMBA is talking a lot about strategy. We'll be giving you some more tools, analytical approaches to strategy, some of the philosophical background of strategy. But I think we'll be doing more. We'll be making you ask the question, what is strategy for? What are all the things it can do? And what does it mean for me and my colleagues, my team? So I asked the question, who's a strategist around here? I'm raising issues of particularly your identity as a strategist, and how you can help others be strategists, or at least think more strategically. So those are the issues I'm going to talk about here. What I'd like to do is introduce the strategy group of faculty. We're about 13 strong. It slightly depends on how you count. We have many postdoctoral researchers and some PhD or DPhil students. And what we want to pick up on here is what Jonathan started with. The Saïd Business School is part of a world-class university. As part of that, we all do research. And we'll be talking about how that research informs the teaching that we do here. That will lead us naturally to the core EMBA strategy course, and maybe touching on a few of the options and electives that you'll have available. And then I'll talk about my favorite topics, my own research on developing a strategist identity. So who is a strategist around here? And then research that I've been doing, it's ongoing at the moment, on mastering strategy discourse, how to talk like a strategist, if you like. At a couple of points, you'll be asked to you'll be invited to participate in a Mentimeter poll. So some of you will be familiar with Mentimeter. You can access this via QR code. If you have your phone available, that will probably be a help. And otherwise, you can go in to the Mentimeter simply through the web page, and there's an address that I shall give you. But if you have your phone available and ready for that in a few minutes, that will make things better. Please do ask questions as we go along. I'll probably spot them. Jonathan may identify some of the more important ones or urgent ones that and may help me doing that. It's probably best to do this in the chat. Questions are, I think, anonymous, so do feel free to ask any kind of question. Yua Chang is raising her hand. Is there something you want to say? Is it Yuna? Something to say before we get going? Or perhaps you can put it in the chat. Good. Okay, so dialogue in chat,
sorry,
and maybe
Richard, just quickly to say to everyone, if you can just put your questions in the chat, rather than raising your hand, that'll just help us to keep a track of them a little bit easier.
Yeah, exactly. That's probably the best thing to do.
Yeah, sorry for interrupting, Richard.
Not at all, Jonathan. That's why you're there. So here's the Oxford Strategy Group. There are 13 core faculty, that is tenure or tenure track faculty. Tim Galpin on one end of the slides is somebody who does a lot of EMBA core teaching and will be teaching the 2024 spring strategy course. I can touch on what he does. You can see myself at the top right-hand side, but there are many other faculty that we have here, and I'll talk about some of their research themes and how those inform our teaching as well as we go along. You can find out about us all at the link there, sbs.ox.ac.uk/research. So you can find out more about what we do quite easily there. As I said, we are research-led teachers. We're part of a university, and a great university. And we have many, many research themes which we pursue. For me, it was quite arbitrary to choose the 5 I've mentioned here, because there is much more than this. And also people overlap. So for instance, Tom Lawrence, who is in the top layer, does research in other areas around entrepreneurship, particularly social entrepreneurship. So there are many, many overlaps here. This is not comprehensive, and it is not exclusive. So Mark Ventresca and Tom Lawrence look at institutions, social institutions, legal institutions, and how those influence strategy and how strategy can help change those institutions. Mark Ventresca's, I'll mention a little bit later, talks a lot about institutional strategy and institutional entrepreneurship as levers of change of the world in which we operate. Eric Zhao, Michelle Regan, and Pina Ozkan are into entrepreneurship. entrepreneurial strategy, and digital strategy. Pinar particularly is, I think, one of the world experts on platform strategy. So we have plenty of work going on there. Rafael Ramirez and Trudy Lang are very well known for what they call the Oxford approach to scenarios. So they do a lot of scenario analysis. They work with major clients in executive education and consulting, but also prolific publishers of books on the scenario system, particularly the Oxford approach to scenarios, which is all about fostering good strategic conversation. Eero Vaara, Violetta Splitter, and myself, we focus on new modes of strategizing. Violetta and myself, particularly on open strategy, something we'll talk about in a moment. Eero does a lot on, some on open strategy, some on AI now increasingly, and on discourse, storytelling and strategy. So different ways of doing strategizing, not just the analytical way. And Tim Galpin, who I mentioned before, and whose teaching I'll talk about in a moment too, does a lot of work on mergers and acquisitions. Okay, here's Tim. Tim, not quite a typical EMBA strategy teacher in some ways. He's great and he is prolific. I wish we were all equally prolific. As you'll see, Tim has a background in consulting and business himself and continues to work as a consultant, but also as a teacher in the business school across all sorts of programs. You can get a sense of what he does here, particularly the focus on mergers and acquisitions, but also strategy execution, making strategy work, and some of the people issues to do with getting strategic change actually underway. So Tim is an expert in those kinds of areas, and I think he exemplifies our approach to strategy teaching. It's informed by our own research, our own expertise. We will draw upon others. We will use some of the standard tools, but we have our own particular Oxford take. So definitely Tim is an expert in M&A, and he wants to share that expertise with you. And that will be a very typical approach to what we do. Here are some of the topics that Tim will be teaching in early 2024. I think probably that will not capture most of you. He may or may not be teaching in future years. We tend to shift around a little bit to keep things fresh, but you get a sense of what he'll be doing, including his emphasis on merger and acquisition strategy and what he calls the strategy workbook, a process, a set of tools that is encapsulated in his latest book. So again, you will see his publications coming out and informing what he actually teaches. We have some strategy electives, M&A, Tim again, strategy and innovation, Mark Ventresca, who is very much into how we can do institutional entrepreneurship, innovate with different kinds of institutions. And then myself, Eero Vaara, myself, we look at new approaches to strategy work. I would expect Violetta as well to be joining us on that course in future years. She's just starting with us. Okay, there are lots of questions so far on, quite appropriately, the process of applying to the MBA. Are there any questions for me as I complete this part of the talk, which is basically introducing the strategy group, something about its research, and how that research informs our teaching? Are there any other questions to come on that? Please use the chat. So what exactly is strategy? I'm going to be asking you that precise question. So thank you very much, Ashish, because you anticipated where we get to. We're coming close to where I'm going to ask you to do the Mentimeter. Somebody asked if we can participate in research while studying the MBA. There are various ways in which you can do. Sometimes you're fabulous people to work with, working with very interesting organizations. Sometimes that would lead us to enroll you in some of our case study writing. Sometimes you might help us gain access to do further research. And of course, there are research seminars. Some of them might actually be a little bit dry and ill-formed at this point. That's what our seminars are for, to develop ideas, but you will be able to participate in a number of those sorts of activities. So yes, you can get involved in our research. Yeah. Tim will be particularly delighted to meet anybody who's got who's a valuation partner and financial advisory services. And AI is definitely a subject that we're trying to get into, and it's a curious one. So Rafael Ramirez in particular is very interested in how AI can inform scenario analysis. As you can imagine, there are many ways in which you can use AI to generate issues that might be important for scenarios. Okay, thank you very much for the question. Yeah, okay, let me move on. So this is me. I mentioned a moment ago that I've been doing work on open strategy. This is part of a stream of research which really began about, gosh, more than 25 years ago, when we started to do work on what we call strategy as practice. So our intuition was that we needed to think more about how strategy is made in reality and the kind of practical skills which are involved in making strategy. A lot of the research at that point was rather macro, a little bit detached from the realities of strategists in the field. So we're very interested in strategy practitioners and what we sometimes call their praxis, or their activity as they make strategy. And one of the things we picked up as we did this research is there's a trend to more inclusive, more transparent, or what we call more open forms of strategy. So I did a book 2 or 3 years ago on opening strategy, looking at the way strategy has, over the last 30 or 40 years, gradually become much more transparent, much more inclusive of many more people. And that would include people from outside the organization, sometimes collaborating together to create collective strategies in a particular sector. Again, that's something Rafael Ramirez has actually done a lot in his consulting. So we did a couple of books on that fairly recently, and you can see what they are. Okay. Oh, and by the way, I do have a couple of textbooks as well. So somebody asked a moment ago what strategy is. I come at that in a slightly indirect way, that question in an indirect way, by asking you in the Mentimeter poll to put in a few words, 2 or 3 words, perhaps, each. What words do you associate with the term strategist? If you're going to join the EMBA, we want you to become more strategic, to be a more effective strategist. So what are the words that you would associate? A theory of change. Come on, we want more. Not a plan. That's interesting. Big picture. Blue sky. How to win. Yeah, buy that. More. Gosh, I'm going to have to put my readers on, my glasses on if I can find them. Oh, they're getting small. Thinker. Decision maker. Setting goals. Forward thinking. Oh, I think we need more than this. Value creators being put transformational. Put it in the Mentimeter if you can. A doer as well as a thinker. I like that. That's interesting. Measurable, blue sky. Anything more?
Yeah, I can see lots of people putting suggestions in the chat. So if you could actually put it in the Mentimeter, then that'll add to the picture.
Well, we can see it. What words do you associate with the term strategist? Goal setter, objective orientated, not a plan. I'd love to be able to discuss that with you further, but I do absolutely agree strategy is about more than simply an arid plan. Eero Vaara certainly thinks it needs to be a good story and has done some research on what qualifies as a good story. A philosophical framework, I like that, a kind of umbrella which all sorts of things could go into. We've got it. Now, does that a planner who sets out policies and makes sure they're carried through? Eric is putting in that might be a bit too much to put in the Mentimeter. Revolutionary sometimes. Okay, thank you. 84 responses, that's not too bad. Does that, I think you should use the chat to discuss, advocate your views if you want to. Critical thinker and innovator. Thank you very much. That's really interesting. I think we got some contrast there. Thinker, doer, long-termist, big picture. Yeah, I buy those. Revolutionary, transformational, philosopher. Yeah. Goals and objectives are coming out quite a lot as well. Those are some themes that I certainly think we can help you with. Visionary, vision, planner, and long-term have come out as the most important. Planner or not a plan, that's a big issue here. And I think one of the things we would address, and Tim would address, probably in the first session, how to manage the planning process in order not to squeeze out the vision. Yeah, not to be paralyzed by analysis. Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to another one, I think. How do you see yourselves? You're thinking about doing an EMBA. You're hoping to learn a bit about strategy. How do you rate yourself now as a strategist? Before? Not too bad, thanks. That's a first, second, third, fourth. I just put some words in. Someone's a total legend out there. I'm sure we have some bluffers. We're all bluffing to an extent. Mission or vision? What on earth is the difference? Can you use the Mentimeter if possible? Sunlam and Christine and others have put their names in there. Not too bad, thanks. Well, that's a challenge. What are we going to teach you? No one yet a total, or not many a total legend. Bluffers, thank you for your honesty. Those who get confused about some of the jargon, mission, vision, what's the difference, etc., etc. Thank you also for your honesty. We can help you. A little rubbish at implementing, someone's admitting. I think we're all, implementing is the hard bit. So I think we're all with you there. I'm going to move on to that. Not too bad, thanks. You're giving us a challenge. Can we offer you anything different? Can we offer you new insights? Those of you who already think you're not too bad. I believe that our research-oriented approach can help you. It can deliver extra insights, both to the standard curriculum and maybe stretching the standard curriculum a little bit further. Okay, you're aiming for legendary. Please help me get there. There's another honest person. Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on. Not too bad, thanks, you lot. What have we got to teach you? I'm going to draw on my research, and I'm going to claim that we have some insights to give you from the research, which will at least amplify the notion of what you think strategy is. So with Saku Mantri, the chap on the left with the beard, I work with at McGill University in Canada, and we've been exploring the way that the strategist is actually a personal identity, one that many of us pursue. We want to become strategists. We want to become more strategic, but it's elusive. It's difficult to achieve. So what we've begun to explore is the kinds of identities and the kind of identity journeys required to become more fully a strategist. Somebody asked for their help, our help, to help them become total legends at strategy. That's part of your personal identity to pursue. The second project I'm going to talk about is with Violetta Splitter, who's just joining us from Zurich, and David Seidel, who's still at Zurich. And that's as strategist, it's a discursive competence to learn. What I'm referring to here is, how do you learn to talk strategy more? Okay, so I'll talk about those two research projects. The first we published already in a reasonable journal, Strategic Organization, and the second, strategy or strategist, is a discursive competence to learn. We're still going through the peer review process. We're at the painful moments of revise and resubmit. So this is, cutting edge research, if you like, but anyway, it's not even on the press. It's something we're working on. I hope you'll find it interesting. Okay. So what that Saku Mantri and I have been doing is how people become a strategist. And our basic proposition is that it's more than just learning a set of tools. To a certain extent, it's an identity journey. And so what we did is track 23 seniorish managers, or one or two business owners, as they try to develop their strategy skills. And particularly we centered on a project, on a moment in their careers where they were about to undergo an Institute of Directors course on strategy. Yeah, so they're about to do a strategy course, a bit like what you might be doing on the EMBA. So we tracked them, both before, interviewing them before, and interviewing them about a year after. And we also interviewed mentors, both before and after. That is, each of the 23 identified a mentor, somebody who knew them well and was guiding and advising them and could give insight into what they're good at and what they needed to develop and how they were actually improving particular aspects of their skills. And so we followed them over between a year and 2 years. And what we're looking at was a number of what we call tactics that people were using as they became strategists or as they tried to develop their strategy. And one of the things we talked about was how they saw a strategy identity in different ways. An ideal, something on a pedestal, something to aspire to, and to be measured against, and really a part of their own self-worth. Typically, they were somewhat ontologically insecure. That's a fancy word for just saying a bit psychologically insecure. It just came from the theory that we're using. Others were very practical. Strategy was just a tool. They needed it for their career development. They would probably acquire these skills and then put them back on the back burner as the next set of jobs, tasks emerged. They saw it as in an emancipatory way, as a way of giving them some skills which will liberate them and allow them to move on. Okay. They were pretty secure people. They saw becoming a strategist as a supporter of their sense of agency, the supporter of their career as they wish to develop it. Then there's self-actualizers amongst this group of 23 developing strategists. For them, strategy was always part of their identity. What they wanted to do was bed down the skills which would support that. For them, they were secure, and what they're looking for was their identity to be fulfilled or completed by acquiring the skills which would allow them to more fully express themselves as strategists, which is how they saw themselves in the first place. So, what kind of strategist are you? The self-measurer is the insecure one. For them, learning about strategy through the IOD course and through various promotions which would happen over the 1 or 2 years that we are following them, or new challenges that they had to address, it was about reassurance. They were measuring themselves. This particular individual had their ideal strategist. This research was done a little bit of time ago. Is Richard Branson of the Virgin Group. Richard Branson was seen as the ideal. Of course, as a self-measure, they fell short. And for them, learning about strategy, acquiring more strategy skill was about reassurance. I'm not crap after all. And we had a group of about 40% of those 23 were in that category. Self-constructors were nearly 40% as well. Here, they're just practical, pragmatic. As my career went on, especially through consulting and then in various new roles, I became more and more strategic. Yeah, especially as I began to get larger teams underneath me, that strategy side of my skill base developed. That was my objective. I wanted to become more strategic. And in fact, this particular individual was not looking to become a strategist so much as putting that in his toolkit and moving on so that he can move to a chief executive role fairly soon. Absolutely a instrumental, pragmatic way of seeing strategy. For the self-actualizers, probably the smallest group, about 25% as I recall, it was about their personal identity. It's about fulfilling who they were. And this guy, I can still remember him talking with such enthusiasm, sort of slightly charming naivety perhaps, but he regarded himself as having been a strategist since at least when he was 15, when he was trying to beg his parents to let him out, and as he put it, get out partying with the girls and so on and so forth. For him, strategy was part of his identity. He was a strategist from more or less childhood. So for the self-measurers, there's an anxiety. I need to fill a gap. For the self-constructors, there's a purpose. This is a step I need to take in my career. For the self-actualizers, it's something to embrace as truly themselves. What kind of strategist are you? Oh, yeah. Somebody's asked the question, have you ever compared strategists to personality types? We didn't in this research, and possibly we should. And I think that would make a lot of sense. It's something we haven't done. Thank you very much. It's a good question. Any other questions on this? So what am I saying here? As you go through an EMBA, you're not just learning a set of skills. You're changing yourselves or fulfilling yourselves. So you're on an identity journey. It's an identity project. And I hope we can help you with that. You'll be a different person at the end of these courses. That would be the point I would make from here. Okay. Let me talk about the second project, the one which is still underway and is a revise and resubmit. Our research, like in the sciences, goes through peer review. It goes through quite laborious processes. Several times we will be rejected, told to revise, told to change things, told to improve things, and then we resubmit, and we might be rejected again, told to revise, and so on and so forth. About in the Strategic Management Journal, about just under 10% of papers are accepted. So for Violetta, David, and me, actually getting a revise and resubmit is quite a good sign. At least we're in the game. But we've got a long way to go. What we were looking at in this project was not who's a strategist around here, are you a strategist, and what sort of strategist are you, but what sort of, who are the strategists around here? Are your teams strategic enough? And here we are looking at a very large Swiss insurer, and where the chief executive, who had taken over in a time of crisis with a falling share price, and a recently ejected chief executive, so his predecessor had disappeared in unusual circumstances, a very sudden notice. This was a company in crisis. The chief executive launched what he called an inclusive strategy process, where he advertised for people from all levels to help him in his new strategy process. he had to present in about 6 months' time to investors who are very impatient, share price down, new chief executive from outside the firm, a lot of uncertainty. The inclusive strategy process finally recruited 40 people, 40 employees at lower levels of the organization from all around the world who flew in every 2 weeks to do 2 or 3 days of intensive strategy work with the chief executive, helping him hopefully to shape his ideas. But by week 8, the chief executive was very disappointed. But what happened? About 6 weeks later, towards the end of the 20-week process, things were looking up. He felt that there were ideas coming out of this inclusive strategy process, which he could take to the board meeting in October, and then finally to the November investor day, where he had to reassure analysts, financial analysts, that he really had a strategy which would work and help pull the company out of this crisis. 12 ideas out of this inclusive strategy process were finally presented at the investor day. So this was a successful inclusive strategy process. The 40 lower level employees did add value, but the wheels nearly came off the process halfway through. So what happened? Why did it go wrong initially, and how did it recover? I hope you'll be able to see this. I think the text is not very clear, but basically the employees would use 4 kinds of discursive practices: mirroring, localizing, paralleling, and integrating. Mirroring tended to be just saying what the chief executive was saying already. It was imitative, so not adding much value to the chief executive who was looking for new ideas. Localizing discursive practices were talking about, oh, my business in Italy, oh, my business in Mexico, and saying we can generalize what we do in Italy or Mexico to the corporation without much understanding of what was going on. Paralleling, they would begin to introduce some corporate strategy level themes, some of those the chief executive was concerned with, at the same time as bringing in local issues, but they wouldn't really bring those together in a coherent synthesis. Only integrating was the ability to knit together, to integrate corporate and the local issues in a way which would truly both was innovative or insightful for the chief executive who didn't understand the local contexts, but also meaningful to him and relevant to his corporate level because they were tied to corporate level themes. Here, cost efficiency, reigniting growth, and those sorts of things. What you can see is how those changed over time. Early on, mirroring and localizing especially were the dominant discursive practices amongst the employees. It took time for them to learn how to first parallel and then increasingly from about week 12 onwards to integrate the local knowledge to the more corporate themes. So yes, it was before COVID, this particular exercise, quite true. I'm not quite sure why you say that, but quite true. It was in the teens, as it were. Why did that change? Well, they learned, the employees. And they learned because the chief executive coached. The coach, too, please elaborate on paralleling. Paralleling was when you would say, oh, controlling costs is really important. In Mexico, we control costs this way. Without really explaining how the corporation as a whole could integrate those together. So what happened in Mexico is pretty idiosyncratic to Mexico, probably, but not very realistic across the corporation as a whole. I probably shouldn't dwell too much on these particular distinctions because I would like to come to an end, but just to say that the chief executive's responses made a huge difference. Thanks. I'm glad you got it. More or less. What really mattered was when the chief executive offered specific coaching, but often the chief executive didn't. He would offer no reaction, or he would just offer generalities. I need numbers is a very simple example here. Employees learned directly, what we call experientially in learning theory, through the chief executive's responses, particularly specific coaching. But specific coaching was not the automatic go-to response of the chief executive. But they also learned, employees also learned indirectly, because they couldn't all present on the same days, some of the groups had a much more deferred start to their presentations to the chief executive, and they learned vicariously by observing others' successes and failures. So the later the group started presenting to the chief executives, the faster they were to learn how to do the integrating. In other words, if you're going to do an inclusive strategy process, giving people a chance to learn, both experientially through the coaching of senior management and vicariously or indirectly by observing others, are important parts of the design of an inclusive strategy initiative. Okay, so Eero and I, we were probably less research oriented and more practically, that's the kind of thing we might talk about in our strategy elective on new modes of strategizing. So final thoughts, I should conclude. I think what I've tried to discuss with you, and I think also your word cloud helps with that, is strategy is more than a set of analytical tools. Here I've talked about it being an identity. A strategist identity is something that you either need to complete or realize as part of your own personal trajectories. Now, you might be pragmatic about that, you might be anxious about that, or it might be total self-fulfilling, self-actualization. But in some way, it's an identity that you might pursue. In the word cloud, a number of you talked about the big picture. I think that's really important. But it was for the employees in this process, integrating the little picture of their local businesses with the big picture that really mattered. The little picture on its own didn't make sense to the chief executive. He couldn't translate it to his level, corporate level. The big picture on its own, he could do the big picture already. He needed the integration of little and big pictures. You, as very often, I think, responsible for teams at various levels, you may be at quite senior levels already, you have a responsibility to coach your various teams' competence and strategy. So generic coaching in this particular case did not work. It was only specific coaching which did. So you need to work out your own coaching strategy or coaching approach, pedagogy if you like, as you work with your own teams, and just don't assume that they will leap to integrating in a meaningful way on their own. They need help. And the paper, as we develop it, and we've just given you a snippet of it, can provide a few clues about how to do that. Vicarious learning, allowing for vicarious learning is important as well. So in short, I think my bottom line, if you bought any of this, if you've been a little bit intrigued by some of it, I hope it'll reinforce a message from the EMBA in general and from the strategy group in particular. We believe that our research as part of a great university can give you insights that you won't be able to get anywhere else. We're doing research, we're addressing contemporary problems, we're following strategists in real life and looking at organizations as they struggle with their particular strategy processes. We can give you insight, and I hope you'll share your insights on the EMBA course in a way that we can do very uniquely as part of Oxford University. With that, I'll finish.
Thank you very much, Richard. That was an extremely interesting and an insightful session. And I think just looking at the the kind of back and forth on the chat. I think it's fair to say that our audience agrees, and apologies to any of those whose questions we didn't quite get to. Hopefully we managed to pick out as many as we possibly could. But I thought that was really a really good overview of what strategy at Saïd Business School looks like. And I think hopefully everyone was able to take away a lot from that. In terms of kind of next steps and what to look out for, what we typically try and do is run one of these taster type sessions once every quarter, give or take. So look out for the next one. We try and sort of cover a different topic each time. And hopefully by the time you've attended sort of a couple more, it'll give you a really kind of rounded view of what you can come to expect on the program. And as I said at the start, if you do want to follow up with us in the recruitment and admissions team, feel free to do so by contacting the recruitment manager for your specific region. I can see a few people have already done so via the chat and shared some details. So we'll follow up with you guys in due course. And look forward to having lots of interesting conversations about the program and whether it could be the right fit for you, and hopefully whether it can deliver what it is you're looking for in terms of outcomes from a career perspective. So just remains for me to say thank you. We've managed to finish on time, so everyone's got a bedtime back this afternoon. Thank you to my colleagues for joining the call as well, and for supporting on answering some of those recruitment and admissions related questions in the chat. And hopefully we got to as many of those as we could, but they were coming in thick and fast. So look forward to keeping in touch with quite a few of you. Thanks again, Richard. And enjoy the rest of the afternoon, everyone, or morning, depending on where you're dialing in from.